Welcome to today's story, where you'll hear how a simple act of kindness on a dark night changed 2 lives forever. I was heading home late that night. The streets were empty, and the air was cold. The wind moved my jacket as I walked. The streetlights were dim, and the shadows were long. The only sound was my footsteps on the quiet road. I pulled my jacket tighter and kept moving. Everything felt normal at first, but then I sensed something strange. It was a feeling I could not describe. Someone was behind me. I stopped for a second, and the sound behind me stopped too. My heart began to beat faster. I turned my head a little and saw a man coming quickly. His hands were in his pockets, his head down, but his eyes were on me. I felt uneasy. Maybe he was just going the same way. Maybe it was nothing. But inside I felt something was wrong. I walked faster. He also sped up. My hands felt cold, my legs heavy. I turned a corner, hoping he would go away, but when I looked back, he was still there. His eyes were dark, his face serious. He was not just walking. He was following me. Fear spread through my body. My mind told me to run, but my legs would not move. The man came closer, and then I saw something in his hand. It was a knife. My breath stopped, and my body froze. He pointed the knife at me and spoke in a low, strong voice. "Give me your money," he said. I looked at him. He was young, maybe a bit older than me. His clothes were old, his shoes had holes, and his hands were shaking. His eyes were not angry, but full of something else, fear, sadness, and need. I reached into my pocket. I had some money I could give him and leave. But something inside me stopped me. He was not just a thief. There was more to him. In that moment, I made a choice that would change both of our lives. I took a deep breath. My heart was still racing, but my fear started to fade. I looked at him again. His hands still shook, and his eyes moved from me to the street and back again. He was nervous. He did not want to hurt me. He just wanted something, money, food, a way out of his troubles. I knew that look. Slowly, I put my hand into my pocket. He watched me closely, his grip on the knife tighter. I took out my wallet and opened it. There was some cash, not much, but enough. I held it out to him. He grabbed it fast, but I did not let go. He looked at me, confused. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice rough but weak. I looked into his eyes. "Are you hungry?" I asked. He did not answer. He just stared. I could see a fight inside him. He wanted to run, but something kept him there. Maybe no one had ever asked him that before. Maybe he didn't know what to say. The silence felt heavy. The night felt colder. Finally, he nodded, just a small nod, but I saw it. I took another breath and made my choice. "Come with me," I said. He looked shocked. "What?" he asked. His grip on the knife loosened a bit. "Come with me," I repeated. "I will buy you something to eat." For a moment he did not move. His eyes searched my face for a lie, for a reason to run. But there was nothing, just honesty, just an offer. Slowly, he put the knife away. His hand shook as he put it in his pocket. He looked at the money and then back at me. "Why?" he asked softly. I gave a small smile. "Because I think you need help more than I need this money." He stood there thinking. Then, without a word, he nodded again. We walked together down the empty street. We were silent. The wind was cold against our faces. The man walked near me, but kept his distance. His hands stayed in his pockets, and his eyes moved around like he was ready to run. I understood his fear. He did not trust me yet. Maybe he thought it was a trap, or I would call the police. But I had no plans for that. I just wanted to help. A few minutes later, we reached a small diner. The lights were bright, and the smell of warm food came through the door. I opened it and stepped inside. The man stood still. He looked at the door, then at me, unsure. His body was tense. I waited, saying nothing, showing him it was his choice. Finally, he took a breath and followed me inside. The diner was almost empty. A woman behind the counter smiled at us. "What can I get you?" she asked. I looked at him. "Order whatever you want," I said. He looked at the menu on the wall, his hands still in his pockets, his eyes moving fast over the words. I wasn't sure if he was really reading them. After a moment he spoke. "A burger," he said quietly, then added, "and fries." His voice sounded unsure, like he was not used to asking for things. I nodded. "And a coffee," I told the woman. She wrote it down and walked away. We sat at a small table in the corner. The man kept staring at the table, tapping his fingers on his leg. He was uneasy, not used to this. I wanted to ask him questions, but I didn't want to push him, so I waited. Finally, he spoke. "Why are you doing this?" His voice was quiet, a little suspicious. I thought for a second and answered truthfully. "Because I know what it feels like to have nothing." For the first time since we sat down, he looked at me. His eyes were full of questions, but he stayed silent. He just nodded. The food arrived, and he started eating quickly. He didn't speak, didn't look up, just focused on eating like he hadn't had food in days. I watched, but didn't say anything. This wasn't the moment for talking. It was for food, warmth, and a bit of peace. He ate fast, almost too fast, like he hadn't had a real meal in a long time. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the burger. He took big bites, barely chewing, swallowing fast. The fries were gone in seconds. I sipped my coffee and kept watching him without speaking. He didn't look up, didn't slow down, just focused on the food. After a few minutes, his plate was empty. He leaned back in his chair and let out a quiet breath. It was the first time I saw him relax even a little. He wiped his hands on his pants and finally looked at me. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but honest. I nodded. "You're welcome." There was a pause, then he spoke again. "I haven't eaten like this in weeks," he admitted. I leaned forward a bit. "What happened?" I asked. He looked down at the table, tracing a small crack with his finger. For a moment I thought he wouldn't answer, but then he sighed. "I lost my job," he explained. "Couldn't pay rent, got kicked out, and then things got worse." His voice was calm, but I could hear the pain. I listened closely. At first, I thought I'd find another job, but no one hired me. I slept in shelters when I could, on the street when I couldn't. Then one day I was just hungry, desperate. He looked up at me. "That's when I saw you." There was something different in his eyes now, maybe regret, maybe shame. I nodded. "You didn't want to hurt me," I said, not as a question. He shook his head. "No," he admitted. "I just didn't know what else to do." His words hung in the air between us. The diner stayed quiet. The woman behind the counter wiped down tables, not noticing us. Outside, the street lights glowed softly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet again. He tensed up, but I didn't take out cash. Instead, I took a small card and placed it on the table. "This place helps people like you," I said. "They offer food, a bed, and even job support." He looked at the card, but didn't touch it. His hands clenched into fists. "I don't want charity," he said tightly. I gave a small smile. "It's not charity. It's a chance," I told him. "A chance to start again." He stared at the card for a long time, breathing slow and deep. I could see he was torn inside. One side of him wanted to try, but the other side was scared to trust. His fingers hovered over the card, but didn't pick it up. I saw the fear in his eyes. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was failure. Maybe both. I didn't rush him. I let him think. The diner was still calm. The night outside getting colder. The streets empty. Finally, he sighed and picked up the card, turning it in his hand and reading the address. "You really think they can help me?" he asked, unsure. I nodded. "Yes, but only if you want it." He frowned and looked away, thinking hard. Change is scary, and trusting again is hard. He slipped the card into his pocket without saying anything, but that small action meant something. It meant he was thinking about trying. That was enough for now. I finished my coffee and looked at him. "Where will you sleep tonight?" I asked. He let out a small dry laugh. "Nowhere," he answered like always. His tone was casual, but I could hear the sadness. I thought for a moment. "That shelter on the card. It's close," I said. "They take people in at night." He shook his head. "I don't know," he muttered. "I don't want to get kicked out again." His voice was quiet, like he was talking to himself. I understood. He had lost so much, maybe more than I could see. Trust was not easy anymore. I couldn't force him. I could only offer. "You don't have to decide now," I said. "Just think about it." He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the table. I waited. Finally, he spoke. "Why do you care?" His voice was softer now, more curious than suspicious. I thought about my answer. "Because someone helped me once," I said, "when I had nothing and was lost, and it changed my life." He looked at me for a long time, his face unreadable. Then he nodded, slowly. I reached into my pocket one last time and pulled out a few bills, placing them on the table. "This isn't for stealing," I told him. "This is for a fresh start." He hesitated, then picked up the money, holding it carefully like it was something fragile. His eyes met mine. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "Just use it well." He nodded again, slower this time. Something in his face changed. The fear, the desperation, was still there. But now there was a hint of hope, even if just for a moment. We sat there in silence. The money was still in his hands, and the card stayed in his pocket. He stared at the table, thinking deeply. I could see how hard this choice was for him. He had spent so long just surviving, always fighting, always running. And now someone was giving him another way, and he wasn't sure if he could take it. I waited, not wanting to push him. It had to be his choice. Finally, he took a deep breath and slipped the money into his pocket. "I'll go," he said, his voice low but steady. "I'll try." It wasn't a promise, not something sure, but it was still something. It was a step forward. I nodded to show him I understood. "That's all you need to do," I told him. "Just try." He pushed his chair back and stood. I stood too. The diner was still mostly empty. The woman behind the counter looked at us but didn't say anything. Outside, the cold night waited. He hesitated for a moment, looking at the door and then at me. "I don't know if this will change anything," he admitted, sounding honest and unsure. I gave him a small smile. "You won't know until you take the first step," I said. He nodded slowly. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. I watched him step outside, standing under the streetlight. For a moment, I thought he might turn back or vanish into the night, but instead he looked at the card in his hand, took a deep breath, and began walking toward the shelter. I stood there a while, watching him, until he disappeared from sight. A part of me wanted to follow, to be sure he really went, but I knew I couldn't. This was his path now. I had done what I could, and the rest was up to him. As I left the diner and headed home, I felt something different inside. I had almost become a victim that night. my life could have gone a very different way. But instead, I met someone who needed help more than I needed to be safe, and I made a choice, not to run, not to fight, but to listen, to understand, to give. I never saw him again after that night. I never found out if he stayed at the shelter or found a job, or if his life changed. But I like to think it did. I like to believe that sometimes a single act of kindness is enough to change a life. And maybe, just maybe, that night was the beginning of something new for both of us. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who believe in the power of compassion. See you in the next video.